I still remember that morning like it just happened yesterday. I was sitting at my small desk in the corner of the office, a space I had decorated with a tiny plant, a family photo, and a mug that said, "Do not disturb until coffee." The air smelled faintly of burnt toast from the break room toaster, and the hum of the fluorescent lights overhead made everything feel more sterile than alive. I had worked for weeks on a project that meant everything to me, staying late after everyone else had gone home, ordering cheap takeout that I would eat cold while typing away. My laptop had become an extension of my body, my notes covering half the desk, and sticky notes were plastered across my monitor like a crazy quilt of thoughts. I believed this project was going to prove to everyone that I wasn't just another assistant or background employee, but someone who could bring real change to the company. I poured not just hours, but my creativity, my frustration, and even my sleepless nights into it. When the day of the presentation finally came, I walked into the conference room with my heart pounding, but my head held high. My boss, Karen, was already there, smiling her perfect corporate smile, the kind that looked polished but empty. She wore her usual expensive perfume, so strong that it clung to the room even after she left, and her manicured nails tapped impatiently against the table. I sat quietly, rehearsing in my head the way I would explain my concept, the way I would show the team the strategy I had mapped out. The presentation began, and that's when the knife slid between my ribs. Karen stood in front of everyone, clicked the slides, and began explaining the project, my words, my research. She spoke with authority as though every late night, every small detail, every innovative idea had sprung from her brain instead of mine. At first, I thought maybe she'd give me credit, maybe she'd mention my name. My chest tightened as I waited, telling myself she'd say it any second now. But she didn't. Instead, she basked in the glow of nodding heads and impressed smiles from executives who barely knew my name. I felt my face burn, my palms sweating against the notebook in front of me. I scribbled nonsense on the paper just to keep my hands busy, because all I wanted to do was scream. The betrayal sat heavy in my throat, choking me with every passing second. After the meeting ended, people congratulated her, clapping her on the back, praising her brilliance. She looked radiant, like she had just won a prize, while I sat there in silence, invisible. No one asked about the countless emails I had sent, the drafts I had shared, or the endless hours I had sacrificed. It was as if I didn't exist. I remember walking back to my desk in a fog, the buzzing office suddenly too loud, phones ringing, people chatting, printers spitting paper. My little plant seemed to mock me, standing there cheerful while I felt hollow inside. That night, lying in bed staring at the ceiling, I replayed everything in my head. My boyfriend asked why I was so quiet, but I couldn't even put it into words. How could I explain the feeling of watching someone else steal your soul's work and turn it into their moment of glory? I felt robbed. I felt small. I kept thinking of all the times Karen had told me, "You're such a valuable part of the team." Now I realised those words had been nothing but crumbs she threw at me to keep me working harder, while she reaped the benefits. I'd promised myself, as I stared into the dark that night, that this wouldn't be the end of my story. It hurt, but deep down a new fire started to burn. If she thought she could erase me that easily, she had no idea who she was dealing with. The next morning I walked into the office, trying to act normal, but my stomach twisted with every step. The hum of conversations, the clacking of keyboards, the smell of coffee drifting through the air, all of it felt like background noise to the storm inside me. Karen was at her desk already, laughing loudly with one of the managers, as if she hadn't just stabbed me in the back the day before. I sat down and opened my laptop, but my fingers froze on the keyboard. I couldn't concentrate. Every time I looked at the spreadsheets and emails in front of me, all I could see was her face smiling in that conference room while she stole everything I'd worked for. I thought about confronting her right then, but my chest tightened at the thought. She was my boss. She had the power to make my life miserable, and I had bills to pay. I couldn't just throw it all away in one angry outburst. Still, every time she passed by my desk with that smug confidence, I had to bite down on my tongue to stop myself from saying something I might regret. During lunch, I sat in the break room with my friend Jenna, pushing my salad around the plate. She noticed right away that something was wrong. I told her what had happened, my voice shaking with anger as I described the way Karen had stolen my work. Jenna's eyes widened. She said she wasn't surprised, that Karen had done things like this before to other people. But no one had ever had the guts to call her out. That only made me angrier. So it wasn't just me. She had a pattern, and the company let her get away with it. That night when I got home, I pulled out my notebook and started writing everything down. Every idea I had contributed, every draft I had sent, every late night I had stayed to finish things. I dug through emails and saved copies of everything with timestamps. The more I wrote, the stronger I felt. I wasn't just going to let this go. If Karen wanted to play dirty, I would play smarter. Over the next few days, I kept my head down and pretended nothing was wrong, but inside I was plotting. I studied her behaviour, the way she talked in meetings, the way she leaned on others to do her work while she took the credit. I noticed how she never actually created anything herself, just polished other people's efforts and presented them as her own. It was like watching a magician reveal their tricks once you knew where to look. I started to wonder how far I could push back without her realizing it. Could I set traps? Could I make her expose herself? The thought both terrified and thrilled me. My mind raced with possibilities as I lay awake at night. I remembered the way her perfume had filled the conference room, choking me while she presented my slides, and I swore I would never let that smell remind me of defeat again. One way or another, I would take back what was mine. A week later, another project landed on my desk, and this time I looked at it differently. Before, I would have poured myself into it without hesitation, giving my best because that's who I was. But now I felt a sharp caution in every thought. I worked on it, yes, but I also made sure to document every step, every email, every tiny change that could trace back to me. I even kept copies of drafts on a personal drive, hidden from the company server, because something inside told me Karen would try to repeat what she had done. She called me into her office one afternoon, her glass desk perfectly polished, the faint scent of vanilla candles mixing with her heavy perfume. She smiled that fake smile and said how impressed everyone was with the last presentation, how we had really delivered. My teeth clenched at the word we. I wanted to scream that there was no we, that it was me alone sweating and struggling over that project, but I nodded and forced a polite smile. She then asked me to start shaping the new project quickly, hinting that the higher-ups were already expecting something great. I walked out of her office, shaking with anger, but also determination. If she wanted me to build another masterpiece for her to steal, she was about to get a surprise. That night I stayed late again, but not for the reasons she thought. I carefully crafted two versions of the project, one polished and ready, the other subtly flawed in ways only I would notice. My plan was simple. Let her take the flawed one if she tried to claim it as her own, while I kept the real one under wraps until the right moment. The thrill of outsmarting her pulsed through me like adrenaline. At home, lying in bed, I remembered the nights when I used to cry from exhaustion, wondering if my efforts would ever be noticed. Now I wasn't just working hard, I was playing a game, one she didn't even know she was in. Days passed and she grew more comfortable, more careless. She started asking me to send her updates directly instead of copying the team, which I knew was her way of controlling the narrative. I agreed, sending her the weaker drafts while keeping the sharp, perfect version saved away. I could see the pride on her face when she presented those drafts to managers, thinking she looked brilliant, while small cracks began to show in the way others responded. Their nods were less enthusiastic, their questions sharper, and Karen fumbled in ways she never had before. I watched it all silently, my face calm, while inside I felt a mix of satisfaction and nervous energy. Every time she stumbled, it was like reclaiming a piece of my stolen pride. I told no one about what I was doing, not even Jenna. This was my secret war, and I wasn't going to let anyone interfere. Still, I knew this was just the beginning. If I wanted real justice, if I wanted her to feel what I had felt that day in the conference room, I needed to wait for the perfect moment to strike. 2 weeks later, the company announced a big quarterly review where each department had to showcase progress and future strategies. It was the kind of event that could make or break reputations, with executives flying in from other states and everyone buzzing with nervous energy. I knew Karen would use this as her stage again, and I also knew it was my chance to finally shift the spotlight. She called me into her office, shutting the glass door behind me, her heels clicking against the floor as she paced. She said she wanted me to prepare the material, but she would handle the presentation part, since she was the one with experience. The way she emphasized that word made my stomach churn. I nodded, hiding the storm inside me, and walked out knowing exactly what I had to do. Over the next several nights, I worked like I had never worked before, crafting the strongest project I had ever created. But this time, I also designed a plan around it. I wrote myself detailed notes, prepared clean versions of my files with timestamps and metadata, and even printed drafts with my handwriting on them. I wanted undeniable proof that the work was mine. On the morning of the review, I dressed carefully, choosing a navy blue blazer I usually reserved for job interviews. I wanted to look confident, even if my heart was racing. The conference room was filled with people in suits, laptops open, the hum of quiet conversations broken by the occasional nervous laugh. Karen strutted in, hair perfectly styled, holding the flash drive with the files I had given her. She didn't know that the version she had wasn't the final one. I watched her step up, smiling her artificial smile, and begin her speech. At first, it was the same performance as always, her voice smooth, her hands moving gracefully. But soon the cracks appeared. The numbers didn't add up. The graphs looked incomplete. Her explanation stumbled over missing details. I saw confusion spread across the faces of the executives, whispers starting at the end of the table. My chest pounded with anticipation and fear. I waited, gripping my pen so hard my knuckles turned white. Then came the moment. One of the senior VPs asked a pointed question about a projection that Karen hadn't included. She froze for a second too long before trying to improvise. That was my cue. I leaned forward and said quietly but clearly that I had worked extensively on those projections and could provide clarity. The room shifted. Dozens of eyes turned toward me. Karen's face twitched, just barely, but enough for me to see the panic flicker in her eyes. With steady hands, I opened my laptop and shared the complete version of the project, the one with every detail polished and every answer ready. As I spoke, I could feel years of frustration lifting from my chest. I explained the strategy, the data, the outcomes, and the room listened. They nodded. They asked follow-up questions directed at me. Not her. Karen sat back, forced to smile, but her knuckles tightened around the edge of the table. For the first time, I felt seen. For the first time, I felt like they recognized me not as her assistant, but as the mind behind the work. When the session ended, the VP shook my hand directly, thanking me for the clarity. Karen left the room quickly, her perfume trailing behind her like a sour reminder of every stolen moment. I knew then that this was only the beginning of her downfall and my rise. After that review, the air in the office felt different. People who had never looked at me twice before suddenly stopped by my desk to ask questions or congratulate me. I could feel their curiosity, the subtle shift in how they treated me. Even Jenna whispered that Karen had looked like she was about to explode during the meeting, though she tried to hide it behind her usual polished smile. Karen didn't say a word to me for the rest of the day, not even a forced thank you. Instead, she closed her office door and stayed inside for hours. I imagined her pacing in those high heels, fuming over how I had stolen her spotlight, just like she had stolen my work. The thought made me almost laugh, but I knew better than to think she'd give up. Karen wasn't the type to surrender. If anything, she would come back sharper, maybe even crueler, and I had to be ready. Over the next week, she started acting strangely. She'd call me into her office for vague discussions, asking me to clarify small things that didn't matter. She sent me emails late at night, demanding updates that weren't due yet. It felt like she was trying to re-establish control, to remind me who the boss was. I played along, answering politely, keeping my tone professional, but inside I was building more evidence. Every email she sent, every file I created, I archived carefully. My little personal drive was becoming a secret weapon. Then came Friday afternoon. She walked over to my desk, her perfume hitting me before she even spoke. And she said in that sweet but sharp voice that she wanted me to prepare a presentation for an external client. She insisted that she would present it herself, but she wanted me to do the groundwork. I smiled and said of course, hiding the rush of anger boiling beneath my calm face. That night, I sat at my kitchen table with my laptop glowing in the dim light, my half-eaten dinner forgotten beside me. I started sketching out the presentation, but my mind kept drifting to the idea of payback. Not just small wins like embarrassing her in front of managers, but real payback. Something that would make her think twice before stealing from anyone again. As I typed, I remembered every night I had dragged myself home exhausted, every tear I had shed in silence, every moment she had smiled at me while stabbing me in the back. The bitterness mixed with determination until it became something stronger. I wasn't just planning projects anymore. I was planning her downfall. The following week felt like a game of chess where every move mattered. Karen strutted around the office like nothing had happened, but I noticed the tightness in her jaw, the way her eyes flicked toward me whenever someone mentioned the review. She was trying to figure out how I had slipped past her control. Meanwhile, I worked quietly, keeping my head down, but I was always 2 steps ahead. I prepared the client presentation exactly as she asked, but again I created 2 versions. The one I handed her was neat but shallow, missing the depth a client would expect. The one I kept was flawless, with insights and ideas that showed real vision. On the day of the meeting, Karen walked in, full of confidence, carrying the flash drive I had given her. She introduced herself to the client, speaking in that polished tone she always used, and began the presentation. I watched from the side of the room, my hands folded, my heart pounding with a mix of nerves and excitement. At first, the client listened politely, nodding here and there, but soon their expression shifted. They asked specific questions Karen couldn't answer. She tried to improvise, but her words stumbled. I could see her losing them, and panic flickered across her face for just a second. That was my moment. I leaned forward, apologized for interrupting, and offered to share additional data I had prepared. The client agreed, curious, and I connected my laptop. I walked them through the complete version, answering their questions with confidence. I could feel the atmosphere in the room shift, the client leaning in, impressed. Karen sat back, her smile frozen, her fingers gripping the table. By the end of the meeting, the client was shaking my hand, thanking me directly, barely acknowledging her. As we walked back to the office, she didn't speak to me. The silence was heavy, like a storm brewing. I knew she was furious, but I didn't care. For once, the credit had gone where it belonged. That night at home, I sat on my couch with a glass of wine, staring at my laptop screen. My plan was working, but I also knew the stakes were rising. Karen wouldn't let this go, and if I wanted to finish what I had started, I needed to be ready for her next move. By Monday morning, the tension between us was so thick it felt like the whole office could sense it. Karen avoided looking directly at me, but she gave me tasks with an edge in her voice, like every request was meant to remind me of my place. I pretended not to notice, answering politely, but inside I felt a strange mix of fear and thrill. Every time she tried to corner me, I found a way to slip out, leaving her looking smaller in front of others. One afternoon, she called me into her office and closed the door. The blinds were drawn, the air heavy with her perfume, and she leaned across the desk with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. She said she hoped I understood that teamwork meant letting the leader shine. Her words were sharp, wrapped in sugar, but the message was clear. She was warning me to back off. I sat there, my palms sweating, but I kept my face calm. I told her I only wanted what was best for the company. Nothing more. She studied me like she was trying to see if I believed my own words. Then she dismissed me with a wave, her nails tapping against the glass surface. I walked out feeling like I had just been in a silent battle. That night I couldn't sleep. I lay awake, replaying her words, feeling the anger pulse through me. She wanted me invisible, obedient, silent, but I couldn't go back to that, not after tasting what it felt like to be recognised. I pulled out my notebook and started writing again, filling page after page with ideas not just for projects, but for how to expose her. What if I collected testimonies from others she had wronged? What if I built a pattern that no one could ignore? I thought about Jenna's words, how Karen had done this before. I wasn't the first victim, and if I didn't act, I wouldn't be the last. The next day, I started quietly asking around, not directly, but in casual conversations. A few co-workers hinted at similar experiences, their faces bitter as they spoke. I could see the frustration in their eyes, the way they laughed it off because they felt powerless. I knew that feeling too well, and it only fueled my resolve. As I sat at my desk watching Karen glide through the office like she owned it, I made myself a promise. I wasn't just going to defend myself anymore. I was going to take everything she thought she had built on the backs of others and make it crumble. The more I listened to co-workers, the clearer the picture became. Karen had been doing this for years, lifting ideas from interns, assistants, even managers, polishing them just enough to pass as her own. People rolled their eyes when her name came up, but no one had ever stood against her, because she had charm, connections, and just enough authority to make fighting back risky. I carried their stories in my head like fuel, each one adding weight to my mission. At night, my apartment became a war room. My dining table was covered with papers, printed emails, and sticky notes. I highlighted dates, circled names, created timelines that showed a pattern of theft and manipulation. Sometimes I would sit back, staring at the mess, and wonder how I had gone from being a quiet worker, desperate for approval, to this woman plotting revenge with the intensity of someone preparing for battle. But then I remembered that conference room, the way my chest had burned as Karen spoke my words like they were hers, and I felt my resolve harden again. At the office, Karen must have sensed I was slipping out of her grasp because she became unpredictable. One moment she was overly sweet, complimenting my outfit, or bringing me coffee I hadn't asked for, and the next she was cold, criticising small mistakes in front of others. I knew it was a game, Her way of keeping me off balance. But I didn't flinch. I just kept collecting, observing and preparing. Then an unexpected chance appeared. Our CEO announced an upcoming leadership summit, where each department would present not just numbers, but visions for the future. It was the kind of stage Karen lived for, but also the perfect moment to expose her. My heart pounded just thinking about it. Could I really do it? Could I stand in front of everyone and pull the mask off the woman who had controlled me for so long? The thought terrified me, but it also lit a fire in me stronger than anything else. Over the next days, I polished my own version of the presentation in secret, adding depth and creativity Karen couldn't match. I also prepared a dossier of evidence, not dramatic but subtle, enough to show a pattern if anyone questioned me. I knew I was taking a risk. If I failed, I could lose my job, maybe even my career. But as I watched Karen laugh in the break room, tossing her hair like she owned the world, I knew the bigger risk was staying silent. The week of the summit arrived, and the office buzzed with nervous energy. Everyone rushed to finalise reports, print glossy handouts, and practice their talking points. Karen was in her element, strutting around giving orders, pretending to polish the slides she thought were perfect. I watched her from my desk, calm on the outside, but inside my pulse raced with every tick of the clock. My secret presentation was tucked away on a drive only I had access to. And every night I rehearsed alone in my apartment, speaking to the empty room until my voice felt steady. On the morning of the event, I dressed carefully, choosing a simple black dress and the same navy blazer I'd worn during the quarterly review. I wanted to look strong, professional, undeniable. The venue was a large hotel ballroom, filled with rows of chairs and the smell of fresh coffee. Executives and managers mingled, shaking hands and trading polite laughs, while I stood quietly at the side. Karen spotted me and walked over, her smile sharp as glass. She told me to sit near the back and be ready if she needed me. The way she dismissed me stung, but it also steeled my resolve. She had no idea what was coming. When it was our department's turn, Karen walked on stage, heels clicking, voice smooth as silk. She opened the slides I had prepared for her, the weaker version, and began her speech. At first it flowed the way it always did, confident and polished, but soon questions started. An executive asked about long-term strategy. Karen hesitated. Another pressed for details on data she hadn't included. I watched her stumble, her perfect rhythm cracking. My hands trembled, but I knew it was time. I raised my voice from the audience, apologizing politely, and offered to expand on those points since I had worked closely with the research. Dozens of heads turned. Karen froze for a heartbeat, then forced a laugh and gestured for me to continue. My legs shook as I walked to the front, but once I began speaking, something inside me shifted. The words flowed, the detail sharp, the vision clear. I saw nods, heard pens scratching as they took notes. For the first time I felt like the room truly listened to me, not through her, but directly. When I finished, the applause was quiet, but genuine. The CEO thanked me personally, saying the insights were exactly what they needed. Karen clapped too, her smile stretched tight, but her eyes were pure rage. As I sat back down, I knew there was no turning back. I had stepped into the light, and she couldn't shove me back into the shadows again. After the summit, the energy in the office shifted like a tide. People approached me in the hallways, not just with polite nods, but with genuine curiosity, asking for my input on their projects or complimenting the clarity of my presentation. It felt surreal, like I had finally stepped out of the shadows I had been forced into for so long. Jenna even joked that I should start preparing my own office because the way everyone looked at me was different now. But Karen, she was another story. She didn't speak to me for 2 days after the summit. When she finally did, it was in clipped sentences, each word dripping with fake sweetness. She told me I had done surprisingly well, but that in the future I should make sure all communication went through her first. I smiled politely, but inside I laughed. She was scrambling to regain control, and it was too late. By then, I had built relationships directly with executives and managers, people who had seen my work with their own eyes. They no longer looked at me as her assistant. They looked at me as someone with real vision. That was when I decided it wasn't enough to just expose her in small cracks. If I truly wanted to take everything she had stolen, I had to dismantle the image she had built entirely. I spent nights adding to my evidence, polishing timelines and creating a portfolio of my contributions that spanned years. I also began encouraging co-workers to share their stories, not just with me, but in subtle ways during meetings. A quiet word here, a small comment there, enough for leaders to notice the pattern. The more Karen tried to shine, the more those cracks showed, and the more people questioned whether the brilliance was really hers. One Friday evening, as the office emptied out, I stayed late organising files. The building was quiet except for the hum of the air conditioning, and in that stillness I realised how far I had come. Just months ago, I had cried at my desk, invisible and humiliated. Now I was planning the final act of a strategy that would not only reclaim what was mine, but also leave her exposed. I could almost taste the victory, but I reminded myself not to rush. Karen was cunning, and if I pushed too fast, she might find a way to spin it. I needed patience, precision, and timing. As I shut down my computer and looked around the empty office, I whispered to myself that the end was near. And for the first time, instead of dread, I felt powerful. The breaking point came sooner than I expected. A major client visit was scheduled, one that could secure a deal worth millions. Karen was determined to make it her stage, strutting around the office, barking orders, making sure every detail of the presentation was perfect. She demanded I prepare the materials, but instructed me to sit quietly in the back during the meeting. I nodded, but inside I was already planning my move. For days, I refined the presentation until it shone. Then I created the same two-version trap I had used before. The file she received was polished enough to look convincing, but filled with holes I knew a client of that caliber would notice. The real presentation, the one I guarded closely, was flawless. On the day of the meeting, the atmosphere buzzed with tension. The conference room smelled faintly of fresh coffee and new paper. The table set with water bottles and notepads. Karen walked in first, her perfume heavy, her smile rehearsed. She opened the presentation with the confidence of someone who believed the room belonged to her. At first, the client listened politely, but it didn't take long for the cracks to show. They asked about data that wasn't there, projections that didn't line up. Karen stuttered, her words slipping, her hands tightening on the clicker. I waited, heart pounding, until one of the clients turned toward me with a frown and asked if I'd worked on the material. That was the moment. I stood slowly, apologized for the confusion, and connected my laptop. The room shifted as soon as I began speaking. The graphs were clear, the strategy airtight, the answers confident. I saw the client's interest grow with every slide, their nods sharper, their smiles genuine. By the time I finished, they were shaking my hand, thanking me directly. Karen sat stiff, her face pale beneath the layers of makeup, her smile frozen in place. As we left the room, she hissed under her breath that I had overstepped. I turned to her, and for the first time I didn't flinch. I told her calmly that I was done letting her take credit for my work. She blinked, stunned. as if no one had ever dared to say those words to her before. That night when I got home, I poured myself a glass of wine and sat by the window, the city lights reflecting in the glass. My hands still trembled from the adrenaline, but deep down I knew it was almost over. The empire she had built on stolen ideas was crumbling, and soon everyone would see who she really was. The fallout came faster than I imagined. Within a week, the executives called me into a closed-door meeting. My stomach flipped as I walked down the hallway, clutching my notebook like it was armor. Inside the room sat the CEO, 2 senior VPs, and the head of HR. They asked me calmly but directly about the work I had presented, about how much of it had been mine. My pulse hammered in my ears, but I opened the folder I had prepared weeks ago. Every email, every draft, every timeline was there, neatly organized, undeniable. I spoke carefully, laying out the facts without venom, letting the evidence speak for itself. Their expression shifted from curiosity to disbelief to anger, not at me, but at the realization of how much Karen had taken over the years. When the meeting ended, they thanked me for my honesty and asked me to keep everything confidential until they handled it. I walked out on shaky legs, but for the first time I felt light, like I wasn't carrying the weight alone anymore. The next morning, the office buzzed with whispers. Karen's door stayed closed, blinds drawn, and by afternoon, HR escorted her out. Her face was pale, her lips tight, her perfume lingering like the ghost of everything she had stolen. She didn't look at me as she passed, and I didn't need her to. The silence said enough. Days later, the CEO called me into his office again, this time with a smile. He offered me Karen's position. I sat there stunned, remembering the nights of tears, the empty takeout boxes on my desk, the way I had once felt invisible. And now here I was, being recognised not just for one project, but for my resilience, my ideas, my fight. I accepted, of course, but in that moment it wasn't about the title. It was about reclaiming my voice, my worth, my power. On my first day in the new office, I brought in my little plant. The same one that had sat by my old desk when I thought no one noticed me. I set it on the corner of my new desk, the sunlight catching its leaves, and I smiled. This wasn't just about revenge anymore. It was about transformation. Karen had tried to take everything from me, but in the end, I took everything from her. And maybe, just maybe, I also found myself in the process.